Hello, and welcome to the Exchange High Availability Eliminating Disaster and Disaster Recovery webinar presented by J. Peter Bruzzese. I'm Kevin Pesch from TrainSignal, and I'd like to take a minute to tell you what to expect in the next hour. I'd like to draw your attention to the questions box in your webinar control panel. Peter will be answering questions today, so please feel free to submit your questions during the presentation. Also, if you have any technical difficulties, let us know in the questions box, and we'll do our best to assist you. Today's presentation will be recorded and available to view on our blog. We'll email you the link after the presentation. After you exit the webinar, you'll be prompted to take a short survey. TrainSignal wants to hear from you. So please take a few minutes to complete the survey. We'll also be choosing one participant from today's audience to receive a copy of TrainSignal's Exchange Server 2010 High Availability, created by J. Peter Bruzzese. To be eligible to win, you must complete the survey you will receive after the webinar. Be sure to fill it out. It only takes a few seconds. Also, if you have additional comments or feedback, you can email us at webinars@trainsignal.com. And with that, thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Now here's Peter.
Greetings. Welcome, everyone. Nice to be with everyone today. The subject that we're going to be talking about is Exchange High Availability, Eliminating Disaster in Disaster Recovery. And it's going to be a little bit different from perhaps an ordinary discussion of high availability. We're going to be discussing more than just high availability itself, but how it works and how you can eliminate the potential of utilizing the traditional backup recovery tools that we've used for years within your environment without the fear of losing data. So stay tuned on that. To start with, let me tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'd like to know a little bit about you. So a little bit about me. My name is J. Peter Bruzzese. I'm a Microsoft MVP for Exchange, and I have a list of certifications that you can see there on the screen. You know, I personally think that certifications are a good way to provide some type of proof that you know what you're talking about. At the same time, of course, you need to have some experience. You need to have a way of proving that you have the skills and not just the cert. So, you know, obviously I think that certification is important, but you always need to continue to refine what you know and show that you have some real practical world experience. And sometimes you get that through a webinar like this because you get an opportunity to hear about different viewpoints. Now, I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. I'm a technical author with over a dozen books that have been sold internationally to my credit. I'm a technical speaker for conferences like Tech Mentor, Tech Ed, Connections, and others. My latest book, actually, I don't have it listed here on the slide, but my latest book is called Conversational Geek. It's a real fun book that deals with 7 chapters that teach all the basics and fun things like where did the operating system come from, how does the internet work, fun things like that. So you can check out conversationalgeek.com. Now, from the Exchange perspective, Exchange is my passion. It really is. It's something I've been working with and teaching for 10+ years. I've been an Exchange instructor for a variety of different training agencies and private corporations. And with regard to disaster and disaster recovery, I was the Commvault Systems Exchange disaster recovery expert for quite a while and taught agencies around the world how to recover their Exchange data. That is one of the reasons I'm so excited about utilizing high availability in Exchange to eliminate the need for the traditional backup recovery solutions, because with my experience, I found that to only be a frustration more than anything else. Trying to go to those backup tapes back in the day or backup media, you know, whether it's on magnetic disk or whatever, and having to get that data, there's got to be a better way. And so that's what we're going to talk about. You can see a list of some of the other things that I've been involved in with regard to Exchange. But ultimately, at this point, I'd really like to get to know more about you. It helps to really narrow down my understanding of the audience, and then that will gauge where I should go in the discussion. So let's just throw this poll out there. Where are you from? All right, people are starting to weigh in. All right, let's close it out. Looks like everybody pretty much got a chance to vote there. And you can see on your screens, or I think you can see on your screens, that We have the majority coming from North and South America, but we do have some joining us from Europe, from Asia, and from Africa. That's great. And then in terms of your specific environments, let's talk a little bit about your environments here. Let's see. Which version of Exchange are you using? There you go. You should be able to see that poll question now. Oh, very good. All right, let's close that one out and share it. You can see that actually the majority of those on the line here are using Exchange 2010. Some are with 2007, and others are still using Exchange 2003. Very good. And then let's go to our last question, just a very simple one. For those that are using Exchange 2010, are you using DAG in your environment? All right, and you can see there that it's 50-50 almost. Many of you are, but a good deal of you are not. That's great. So that gives me a chance now to move along and start discussing where we're at in terms of Exchange itself. Our agenda for today, we're going to start with comparing high availability to aircraft. We're going to talk about the HADR crossroads, where these two meet. Then we'll discuss the high availability focus point, what high availability is all about. And then we'll talk about how DAGs in Exchange 2010 eliminate the disaster in disaster recovery. All right, very good. Let's start with this comparison to aircraft. This is just a simple illustration to get us started and to get our minds in the right place here. Because the one thing about aircraft is if you're flying on a plane, the idea of redundancy, resiliency, and all these other things sound great. The last thing you want is the final part of a problem with a plane is the word disaster being utilized. You never want disaster recovery when you're in a plane, right? You don't mind if there's some type of redundancy or resiliency. So it's good to know that the wings and the tail flexibility, that there's resiliency there. It's good to know that there are more than one engines on a plane, right? Because it's good to know that obviously if one engine goes down, you still have another engine. It's good to know that in the event that birds fly into the engines, that you're still good to go. Or that there are 3 layers of windows so that the windows don't break. All of that is really great. You like knowing that there's some kind of resiliency. And as far as redundancy, you like knowing that there's more than one pilot. There's a pilot and co-pilot. You like knowing there's 2 ways to lower landing gear, that there are multiple fuel lines and hydraulics. You know, that you have, if it's fly-by-wire systems like they have with the new Boeing 787, that the system's quadrupled. There are 4 independent channels. So that makes you feel good that there's all of this resiliency and redundancy. You prefer that to the word recovery, because when it comes to a plane, things are flying along. If there's a disaster, that's not really, it's typically something that is a major disaster. So the same is true when it comes to your environment. The last thing you want to deal with is a disaster. As far as the crossroads of high availability and disaster recovery, high availability goes beyond uptime of a server. It's more about being accessible to users, ready to work. For example, when it comes to Exchange, knowing that your server is up and running is not good enough. The server's up, that's great, but what if you can't access your Exchange services? If you can't access your mailbox? Well, then just having uptime of the server is not going to be what you need. Instead, you need to make sure that those services are accessible. So high availability is all about keeping your environment accessible, while disaster recovery is all about recovering your environment should it go down. Now, you might say, well, these two, how do they meet? They seem like they're so different. But, you know, you want your systems to be as available as possible unless the unthinkable happens. And the unthinkable can be anything from a nuclear disaster to a major storm coming through to a blackout, you know, that takes down all of the servers in your site. You know, those are all disasters that can prevent a user from accessing their mailbox data. So when that happens, you may still have high availability in play. It may still be part of your solution. But at some point, if enough things go wrong, much like a plane, if enough things go wrong, you switch from having a high availability situation to a situation that involves disaster recovery. Now, the two meet at some point if you have planned properly. They don't have to necessarily be separated by miles and miles of nothing in between. The value of using high availability to mitigate disaster recovery is easy to see when you consider your RTO and your RPO. Let's talk about those terms for a little bit because maybe they're new to you. So our recovery time objective, the fancy definition is it's the duration of time and a service level within a business process within which a business process must be restored after a disaster or disruption in order to avoid unacceptable consequences associated with breaking in business continuity. Okay, that's the Wikipedia fancy definition. The simple definition for RTO is the acceptable time without service being available. Now, for some you would say, well, no, there is no acceptable time here. You know, if I don't want my services ever being down. But let's face it, some of you are listening and you're thinking, well, you know, that's what I need. I can't have even a second of downtime. But others are listening and you're realizing, you look at your environment and you say, you know, a little downtime is not going to kill anybody if it's at the right time, if it's, you know, at a time when no one's using the services or we're not really expecting people to have to access their mail. So depending on the size of your environment, the type of environment it is, whether or not there are branch offices that go across multiple time zones and so on, you may have circumstances where you don't need 100% uptime, even though that's the hype these days, that, oh, you have to have it up 24/7. Okay, but you know your environment and you know whether or not that's actually what you need. So the RTO is something to consider. The recovery point objective is the other thing to consider. Now, the fancy definition from Wikipedia is the maximum tolerable period in which data might be lost from an IT service due to a major incident. Okay, the simple definition is how much data, past and present, must be restorable in the recovery point objective, in the recovery time objective. So, in other words, how much data do you need to get back? Now again, here's where the extremists say, I need all of the data. We want all of the data back. All right, that's true. You know, you want all of your data. And most likely, if you have a variety of different options in place, you're not going to lose your data. But when you're thinking about recovery time objective, in some cases, you're so interested in getting email services back up and running that you don't really care about the past data to start with. And that's where you start dealing with things like dial tone recoveries and so on, because that's the fastest way to get people back up and running, get themselves sending and receiving email again, and you'll worry about getting their data restored and then merging it back into their mailboxes, you know, when you have the time and when you have the ability. So a lot of times it really does come down to what your organization needs. So RTO and RPO are very important. Then we talk about redundancy, resiliency, and recovery. So the keys for making a solution like Exchange more highly available include the following. For starters, redundancy. Having more than one server, power supply, site copy, this is all essential for redundancy. Resiliency, again, in thinking about what we have with our planes, it's the ability to keep working despite a single or even multiple software or hardware failures. So we need to have this in play with Exchange. And then, of course, look, there's no way I can convince all of you. There's no way I can convince all of you that recovery is not important. Recovery is absolutely important. So we need to restore data from a backup sometimes. Sorry if we just lost volume there for a moment. Somewhere in my room I had a phone that went off and I had to throw it out of my office. So there you go. So the old view of disaster recovery. In the past, cost is what prohibited most organizations from pursuing alternatives to disaster recovery. So the cost of having the alternatives, the high availability alternatives, the clustering alternatives, and so on, it was just so astronomical that there was no way for most companies to be able to provide this. And so a disaster, and those times a disaster might be something simple, something like a disk failure or a server failure. Back in the day, those were not considered simple disasters. Those were major things if a disk goes bad, especially if you didn't have a RAID solution in play. And so there were all these different tricks that we were trying to work with, like putting the database on one disk that was a RAID 5, putting the transaction logs on a mirrored set of disks, and we did whatever we could, especially those who were looking, at cost as being a big problem. With server failures, we were really stuck because without clustering involved, there was really not much that we could do. And so those were some of the simple disasters that we dealt with, and then of course there were also the more complex ones like fire and destruction. So when we think about disasters in the past, those were some of the big things. But in terms of the modern view of disaster, again, we're looking at big things like nuclear or some kind of power outage, some kind of Hurricane Katrina coming through and knocking out our entire city. I mean, these are very real possibilities that affect millions and millions of dollars worth of data. And so in thinking about that, how do we resolve those issues in modern times, and how do we look at it without having to worry about the backup as our first line of defense? So that's where high availability is a real game changer in Exchange. If your data was available 24/7, 365, if it was guaranteed, would you need disaster recovery? Well, you might say, yes, I still would. And my question back would be, why? And so you would probably say, well, look, okay, especially those 50% out there that are already using DAG in your environment, you're probably thinking, wait a minute, Pete, the DAG is great for high availability for my existing data, my modern data, what's happening right now today. But if folks have deleted things, let's say they deleted a few messages and you have your deleted item retention set to 15 days, or maybe you've even upped it to 30 days, and those 30 days have passed. Well, look, I need to have some kind of a backup in order to recover that data. No, you don't. Why do I say that? Well, because in modern times, the push has been toward having an archive solution. You need an archive solution, not just a backup recovery solution. So what does an archive solution do for you? Well, it provides you the ability, first of all, to discover any of the data that you have. So if there's legal discovery that needs to take place, let's say because there's some kind of litigation that's going to take place against your organization, you are prepared. You have been compliant to the direction. You have an archive that goes back however many years for your environment, and that means that that data is there. If it's a good archive solution, you can quickly reach out to it. In fact, you don't even have to reach out for it if it's a good archive solution. The user should be able to reach out and grab that email that they deleted from last year if they want to. So that's the beauty of an archive solution. Now, I'm not here to sell you on an archive solution. I'm here to really convince you that you can use high availability to eliminate disaster in disaster recovery, that you don't have to go reaching for those backup recovery files in order to now restore your Exchange. But you have to at least make the mental jump toward high availability with an archive solution in order for that to happen. Now, the technology has existed for a long time for high availability as well as for archiving, but the price tag was the wall between us. Exchange 2003 had a shared storage solution with clustering to provide some high availability. It was called a single copy cluster, or SCC, in Exchange 2007. And now we look at Exchange 2007 and then 2010, and again, some of you are still working with 2003, but unfortunately the new methodology to provide high availability is just not in 2003. So this is more of a reason than ever to move toward Exchange 2010. Some of you may be asking in the questions, I haven't looked at the questions yet, but some of you may be wondering, well, look, if I'm on Exchange 2003, should I wait for the next flavor of Exchange, which who knows when that's going to be released, but let's just assume it's going to be released at some point in the near future, 6 months, a year, who knows. Should I wait? Well, the honest truth is you're waiting for something that's already available to us in Exchange 2010 if your biggest concern is high availability. You've got those features right there. So you might want to move to 2010, and then certainly if the next flavor of Exchange is something that you're interested in, then you can certainly consider moving to that one at some other point in the future. So we're looking at the value here of 2007 and 2010. Before we go too far, let's take a step into a discussion as to how all of this actually works in terms of our concerns. So the three main concerns for disaster recovery. There's the disk, which on the disk you have your database itself. So the database is another concern, especially in terms of corruption. We don't want to eliminate that as a potential cause for concern. Database corruption is an issue, and we're going to discuss how DAGs with Exchange 2010 mitigate that. But disk is a key concern, then the server itself, and then the entire site. All right, so those are the three concerns when it comes to disaster recovery. So methods within Exchange 2007 and 2010 include looking at, with 2007 we had LCR, local continuous replication. We had CCR for the server, cluster continuous replication, which required a lot of extra work in order to get the clustering services set up. You had a passive mailbox server and an active mailbox server. You had to configure those when you did the installation. There were a lot of limitations, but it was the best option of Exchange 2007. So for those of you who are still working on Exchange 2007, you do have the ability to have high availability through these various means. And then in terms of site resiliency, there was standby continuous replication. Now, the problem with those two, LCR and SCR, is that they didn't use clustering services. So if anything did go down, in the case of LCR, if the disk went down, you had to manually switch over to the other disk. In the case of the site going down, there was a lot of manual intervention involved. But in both of those cases, that's just what we had. So, you know, the amount of time that was actually down, we were down, would be minimal compared to older solutions, or no solution, certainly. But then with Exchange 2010, database availability groups were introduced. And this is just a tremendous solution. It's an amazing solution that's been provided by the Exchange team. We'll start with the price tag. It's free. It's built right in. Does that mean it's going to cost you nothing? Well, no, obviously, you're going to need to spend some money. You're going to need to spend money working with multiple servers and getting this set up and designing it and deploying it and making sure that you have it all set up properly. You're going to have to spend money on more software. But look, that's sort of a given expense of availability. That to make anything more highly available, you need to have, you know, duplication of it. So you have to just expect that there will be an expense. But compared to the days of old, this expense is really nothing, you know, in terms of the amount of money you're going to spend compared to the benefits that you'll have, especially if you can eliminate the time and effort and money that's spent on your backup solution. Just taking a look quickly in how the storage architecture works in this regard so that you're not at a loss regarding your Exchange environment. You need to visualize the technology that's in place. So to start with, there's a database file. It's called an EDB file for those of you who are already Exchange admins, and it sounds like there's pretty much everyone on the line is. You know that that EDB file has transaction logs. These logs used to be larger, but with Exchange 2007 and 2010, they're 1 megabyte in size. And basically what happens is when email comes into your server, it gets put into a transaction log, and then as the database frees up in terms of being available, the logs are written over into the database. There's a checkpoint file to make sure that nothing is missed, and the database then will continue to grow, whereas those transaction logs, you know, they grow as well, and that's why something like a backup will oftentimes cull those transaction logs. Another way to cull those transaction logs is to ensure that they don't continue to accumulate, and so you can accomplish that as well. With continuous replication, the database is initially copied. So the first thing that happens when you set up a second system and you make it part of your database availability group and you create a passive copy of the data is the database is copied. And then log files are shipped over and they're replayed constantly to keep that database up to date. So this allows you to have a redundant copy of your data that is waiting for the opportunity in the event the first system goes down. That second system can automatically jump into the mix and can start providing email and mail services to your users. So that's a tremendous thing in terms of providing higher availability. Database availability groups, these use continuous replication. So there's that constant shipping of the logs and replaying. There are up to 16 servers that you can use. So for those of you who are working with Exchange 2007, you realize that you have a limitation. You can go from one active server over to one passive server. And then you can also establish, you know, standby continuous replication that allows the data to be moved off-site to other locations. But with a DAG, you can have 16 different servers in the mix. So that's impressive. It uses clustering features like heartbeats and like a file share witness, and this connects members of a DAG. So the heartbeat, basically it's a simple method of servers checking in with one another to ensure that they're still alive. This heartbeat goes back and forth between these systems. The witness server, or file share witness, this is a method for providing a referee between DAG members in the event it appears that one has gone down. Now, we mentioned this, the witness server, as it's really not something that's always necessary, only necessary in the event where you have an even number of mailbox servers in play, because you need then to have a tiebreaker to establish what's called quorum. Now, quorum is an interesting thing because with quorum, what we're basically saying is that there's a way to break a tie. If you only have two servers, like here, we'll go back here for a second. If you only have two servers in the mix, and let's say the system 1 goes down, and system 2 says, well, I don't get the heartbeat anymore. I really need to go into action here and become the active copy here. Well, the problem is what if system 1 didn't really go down? What if there's simply a problem between the communication of system 1 and system 2? How would system 2 know that? If system 2 goes live, then system 2 now could run the risk of being active when system 1 is active. And this creates a problem called split brain syndrome. It's also termed world chaos. Obviously, these terms are not good things. World chaos, not a good term for your Exchange environment. And what's basically happening is you have two systems that think they have the active copy of the database. So how do we prevent system 2 from jumping the gun and deciding that it should step up when that's all that it's actually designed to do here? It's ready to go. Well, that's where you need to have another third server in the mix. Now, that third server could be a third mailbox server, in which case you don't need the file share witness, or it could be a third server that's not an Exchange server. It could be a third server that's perhaps a hub transport server and is waiting there with a way of saying to system 2, look, I'm in contact with system 1. There's no need for you to get involved. Everything's good. And so then it gives you time to correct the issue without having split brain syndrome. So there's the file share witness, and it provides this quorum or referee between DAG members in the event it appears that one has gone down. Now, we're just going to take a look at visual DAG here for a moment. We're not going to get into a discussion of the different design and deployment aspects of a DAG at this point. Every environment, and I see we've got about 100 people listening in at this point, every environment is going to be a little different. So if you have, let's say, a single site environment within a single office structure, you can have a DAG. If you have multiple sites within the same city, within the same country, you can have a DAG. If you have multiple sites strewn across the globe, you can have a DAG. And that's the only option that's built right into Exchange, and it satisfies all of the different types of scenarios out there. Now, the only thing that doesn't get satisfied in every case is the concept of an automatic failover. And we'll talk about that in a moment after we discuss this particular slide and the way things are mapped out. So for starters, you've got multiple systems, and the way you establish a DAG is you create the database availability group, which is not something that is too difficult to do in the Exchange Management Console. You just say, I want to create a database availability group, and you give it a name. Then you add members to that database availability group. So in our case here, we would have to add System 1, System 2, and System 3 to that DAG. And then at that point, we might have 3 different databases, one on each system. We may not. We may not have that many databases at all. We might simply want System 2 and System 3 for the passive copies of the database. I'm using the term replica. That's simply to help you to visualize what's happening with the data. But the term itself is not really appropriate in this case. We think of replicas when we think of public folders, and we create replicas here. When it comes to the DAG copies, there's the active copy of the database, as you can see in with System 2, Database 2. We have our active copy. That is the live copy of the database that's working for users. And if something happens there, there's a passive copy on System 1. The passive copy is kept up to date with continuous replication. Then you can see over in System 3, there's another type of passive copy, but it's called a lagged copy. Now, this is something that's very helpful for ensuring any type of database corruption or a virus, things of that sort, don't get copied automatically through the continuous replication process. So you can establish a lag on the copy. And you can determine how long you want for that. You know, there's various time periods that you might want. In fact, you might want multiple lagged copies. One that lags for, you know, so much time, you know, maybe a shorter period of time, and then one that lags for an even longer period of time, just to make sure if something harmful did come through that you have this time to stop the process and switch over to the lagged copy. It sounds easier than it actually is, so we're not going to get into the intricate, you know, step-by-step of accomplishing this, but the lagged copy process is something that you'll need to take some time to design properly within your organization. Okay, so hopefully you have the visual understanding as to what's going on here. The next part here is to start thinking about how does this actually eliminate disaster recovery? Well, just looking at this here, on the one hand, back in the day, if you did have a problem with your disk or your server or whatever, you didn't have a passive copy to resort to. So for those of you who have been in this business for a while, you know you'd have to get those backup tapes out, right? And what a nightmare. The other frustration there is that, you know, everything was this tremendous block level restore. You were restoring the entire database. And then companies came out with the ability to do brick level backups, and you could literally back up a mailbox, a specific mailbox. But that involved deploying agents, and you'd have to have these mailbox agents from the company. And this was 10 years ago we were doing this kind of thing. But you could back up individual mail messages from, you know, the highest, you know, people in the company, the partners, the vice presidents, and so on. And you'd pay a hefty price for doing this with the backup solution you used. Back in the day, Veritas was like the biggest thing going. Commvault Systems had their own solutions. And you would do that. But the frustration there, of course, was that, you know, you had to be an expert and you had to make sure everything worked properly and tested it. But here, what a nice thing. You don't even have to think. If System 2 goes down, System 1's going to take over, right? If these two are in the same building, System 1 goes down, System 2, you know, System 2 goes down, System 1 takes over. Everybody keeps working, and you're good to go. That's how we eliminate disaster and disaster recovery. Now we don't have to care so much about the disaster so much as the fact that all of our people are still up and running. And now, of course, we need to get things back into a better balance and make sure that we have the another passive copy in play just in case that disaster grows a bit. Where this becomes still a disaster to worry about is if we lose both System 2 and System 1. You might say, well, then we have System 3. Well, that's true. But let's say System 3 is not located in the same location. At that point, we're looking at a different type of recovery. And this is where, you know, we need to talk about that type of scenario. So, again, if you lose too many servers in a DAG, you can lose quorum. So in our 3 DAG situation that you were looking at there, if we lose both System 1 and System 2, we've lost quorum. We've lost the ability to really prove to System 3 that it's the one that should be up and running and handling all of the workload. And so that's a problem. Whenever you lose quorum, that's going to be a problem. So if you lose quorum, you have to manually intervene in the process. Now, does that mean, am I saying that high availability has a limitation and it's such a great limitation that you should always make sure you have backup tapes or backup media ready and so on? No, that's not what's being said. There has to be, you know, some give and take on this because the manual intervention is going to be necessary at some point. But ask yourself the honest question: is the manual intervention more difficult with a high availability solution, or is it more difficult with a backup disaster recovery solution? Well, just from experience, I can tell you it's a whole lot easier to switch over to another server that has lost quorum than it is to get the backup and running. So now some consider the manual intervention to be a break from the true concept of high availability. But really, whether your system fails over or has to be switched over manually, the recovery time and the availability of those services is still dramatically reduced through DAGs in comparison with traditional backup recovery. Now, why am I trying to sell you on this idea? You know, I mean, it sounds like I have some kind of stake in this. Look, I have no profit to be gained on this. It's simply a matter of understanding that you're duplicating your efforts as Exchange administrators when you have a solid, I'm not talking about a lame DAG deployment, we're talking about a solid DAG deployment where you have enough servers that Microsoft says at least 4 that are handling your data. And if you have this deployed properly, and if you've considered the design aspects of it for your environment, and you have the servers in play, then you are duplicating efforts to also now have an archiving solution, which many of you also have because you're fully aware of your need to be compliant. You've already been hit with various litigation and such, so that you know you need discovery and you know you need to be compliant and all of that. And now you also have your disaster recovery backup solution, which you say you never need and you never go to. Well, of course you don't. It's redundancy that's unnecessary. So at some point, it's kind of like a waste of time to even have that backup recovery solution. And even many companies have decided to start dropping that and to go with just high availability and archive. The archive gives them that ability that they have from the disaster recovery side from a backup. Will it work for you? Will it work? I don't know. A lot of times it comes down to your mental outlook on how all of this works. It's a leap of faith. It really is. Is it working for others? Well, from my understanding, Microsoft is running a full Exchange shop without worrying about backups. So it works for them. How many redundant systems are they using? Obviously more than 4, maybe as many as 16. Who knows? But they actually have published their full layout for their high availability deployment, and you can find that online. They're willing to give you the whole step-by-step of how they did it in-house. So they're pretty confident. When you think about Microsoft, their Exchange environment and what they provide, especially to the outside world, with providing solutions like that, that if they're willing to give it a shot, you might be willing to do it as well. And other large companies have done the same. So, we've moved through this pretty quickly. Just to give you my final thoughts, and then we're going to go through some of the questions, the Q&A, and make sure that we hit all of the questions. But if done correctly, using the proper number of servers, 4 or more, you can eliminate the need for traditional backups as the first line of defense in your disaster recovery strategy. Some may not be comfortable with that, and so they may still want to retain backups, which is up to them. But many have jumped forward to the failover switchover world of DAGs for their Exchange environment. As for longer-term backups and such, archive solutions have taken over that role so that you can perform individual item restores if necessary, along with discovery, and have compliance and so forth also included in the mix. So I think, again, there's a strong case to be made for this. There's a strong case for eliminating the redundancy. We're not saying you're not going to need backups for everything. Of course, there are other things that you'll need to back up, but to eliminate the need for a backup, a traditional backup, and still eliminate the concept of disaster when it comes to your disaster recovery in the process, it's something to consider. It's something to really give some deep meditation to. Before we conclude, I'm going to put the contact information up here on the board, and you can learn more about Exchange through one of the training courses that I've created from TrainSignal. You can see we have quite a number. There's a huge EPIC course, the administration training course. Then we've gone into design and deployment, backup and recovery, high availability, and unified messaging. It's all there, a ton of training really. And our training doesn't just focus on certification exams, although we do keep that in mind, but our main focus is on making sure you can perform the tasks in the real world. You can also read my column on Enterprise Windows, and there's the link there. And you can email me at peter@trainsignal.com or follow me on Twitter at jpbruzzese. So I'm going to leave that up, and now I'm going to go over to the questions that have been asked throughout the session here and see if we can answer some of these questions. All right. And while we're doing this, by all means, continue to add more. So the first question, I can't find Discovery Search Mailbox in ECP. I find just my mailbox users. Okay, I'll tell you what. Whoever asked that question, I can't really see who the person is at this point. That's a question you might want to email me offline because it's dealing with the Discovery Mailbox. Okay, so you can email that to me, and we'll see if we can work that out. Let's see what else we have. A lot of folks are asking for copies of the presentation slides. I think that's available. That will be made available, not a problem. Okay, can high availability be implemented in a small business server 2011 infrastructure? Unfortunately, no. It's not part of that environment because you're only dealing with a single Exchange server. So in order to set up high availability, you need to have at least 3 servers, 2 of them being Exchange servers, and then a third one for Quorum. So it's not part of that type of solution. Can DAG be used across sites? Absolutely, yes. It can be used across sites. So Shane asked this question, very good question. He's saying that he has one site in Austin, Texas, and the home office is in New Orleans. Can they have Exchange servers at both sites replicating between each other? You absolutely can. In fact, that's one of the real values to what DAGs have to offer, because you can have multiple sites all around the globe replicating this data. And the only thing to keep in mind, however, is that if there's a loss of quorum, now you can fail over from one site to another. That's not a problem. If the WAN connection between the two sites is still solid, and if there's still quorum, meaning that there's still enough servers in the DAG to provide a majority vote, then you would be able to fail over from one server to another. And what happens there, maybe I can just give a little insight there. So when you're setting up your DAG, you can establish a preference in terms of the failover, and you can say, I want the preference to be 1, 2, 3 as far as which server is going to get the next copy or of that data. The passive copy is now going to become the active copy. However, that setting is not something to be taken as it's not that it's not too serious, but it's not the end-all and be-all of which server is going to be failed over to. So there's a thing called the Active Manager that is actually taking into account the latency between the different sites, the different servers, and it tries to do what they call a best copy selection. So it looks at everything, and then it chooses the system that's the best copy selection in order to make that go live. So again, if you have multiple sites in play and you do have a failure, it can utilize another server in another site, and it can fail over. If, however, you lose quorum and you have a multi-site environment in play, you're going to need to do a switchover, not a failover. And what that involves is pretty much, you manually have to shrink the size of the DAG, and you have to eliminate the fact that perhaps you've lost a whole site, maybe there's been a blackout, maybe the WAN connection has gone down. Whatever the case, if that's occurred, you're going to need to do a switchover, not a failover. So that's going to involve some manual intervention. Another thing to keep in mind, something we haven't talked about, is a feature called DAC mode. DAC mode is something that's you have to enable on your DAG when you're going to use multiple sites. And this prevents that split brain syndrome, because it prevents those servers, when they come back up from, let's say, a blackout situation, it prevents them from thinking that everything is fine and that they should, that the active copy should resume as the active copy. So it prevents those databases from mounting until you can intervene and get the situation worked out. So I hope that answers your question, Shane. You might have more questions regarding this subject. You're welcome to email me, and we can talk about it even more so. Let's see, what other questions have come in? Is there a DAG feature also for SharePoint? Fabio, excellent question. No, there isn't that I'm aware of. I'm a SharePoint administrator, and I've worked with a couple of different things with SharePoint. There are some interesting things when it comes to SharePoint utilizing SQL, that there may be a way to have duplicates of copies of things in SharePoint, but it's not the same as DAG. It doesn't work the same as DAG. The Exchange databases are different from SQL databases. Now, some have said, I wonder if Exchange is ever going to use SQL as its database, in the background. And that's just been a debate for years. But up until this point, the Exchange team has continued to say that it's just not something that they think is a good move at this point. So but again, there are ways to have multiple copies of your data for SharePoint as well. That's an absolute, but it's not the same in terms of DAG. Okay, the next question. Many of my customers are looking to use Exchange 2010 for AHA, but they only want to implement one server in Site A and one server in Site B. Is this a good design? Best practice? Okay, that's a good question. You're eliminating your most important thing, which is immediate server failover. And if you're dealing with servers in two separate sites, then you're looking at adding a lot of complexity to the design, because now you have no quorum in an individual site. So that's not going to work out very well. That's actually, I would say that's a horrible design. Adding, if you want to do that, that's fine, but then add in one more server in Site A or Site B, and this way you have the ability. Here's the way it's supposed to work. you want the active copy and the quorum really to rest with the site that has the most number of users. So let's say, it depends here, if let's say your company has 1,000 users and you have 900 in site A and 100 in site B, then what you would do is you would put your 2 servers in site A and 1 server in site B, and site B really would just be acting as a backup in a sense, in that the data is being replicated over, and you have a safe backup of all of your data in site B. You could call site B your recovery site. You can call it your cold site. You have warm and cold. You can have your active site and your passive site, however you want to call it. But using one server on one side and one on the other, that's not really the smartest way. There's a really cool article that was written by Scott Schnoll about some of the misconceptions to design. Actually, while we have a few minutes, let me tell you the name of that article because I think you'll like it. I'll pull it up here so that I can tell you the name of it. But it's basically misconceptions in the use of DAG. I'll tell you the full name of it, and then you folks will be able to look for it. All right. So I did a search for DAG misconceptions, and the article that came up, it was a blog on TechNet. The full title of the article is Exchange 2010 High Availability Misconceptions Addressed. Okay, everybody get that? Exchange 2010 High Availability Misconceptions Addressed. It's from the Exchange team blog. It was written by Scott Schnoll. He's really the master when it comes to all of these different, when it comes to high availability. And some of the questions that folks have asked there relate to the design. Things like when I have a DAG with an even number of members that is extended to 2 data centers, placing the witness server in a 3rd data center enhances reliance. Is that true or false? And he completely explains that that's not accurate. So this is a great article to answer those types of questions. I recommend that you give those a look. Let's see here. Let's see what our next question is. And if you have more to those, if I'm answering questions and you have more to the question, you're welcome to ask another question. We have a little bit more time here. How many databases can be DAG'd? Is there a limit? Yeah, 16 is the limit. The number of databases. That's the question, isn't it? No, I don't believe there's a limit in that respect. I'd have to double check on that. I've never asked that question actually. Can we switch automatically our whole exchange to a DR site without any manual intervention? You can if you haven't lost quorum and if there hasn't been a disaster. So that's a great question. In the event, let's say that you had a blackout and quorum is lost and the WAN connection is down, you're looking at a manual intervention. There's no way around that. That's site. It's a switch over, not a failover. If everything's still up and running, you can easily switch your active copy over to any other server, even in another site. That's not a problem. But even that, that's going to be manual intervention. You can switch it over. So yeah, no matter what, you're looking at some kind of manual intervention in that case. How many databases can be? Oh, we answered that. Do you have the same high availability functionality in Office 365 as well? Office 365, if you're talking about going with a full Office 365 deployment, then Microsoft is utilizing high availability in order to ensure that your mailboxes are safe. The nice thing about a hosted solution is that you don't have to worry about it. It's being done for you automatically, and they're taking care of it through DAGs. But if you're using a hybrid solution where you have your in-house on-premises solution and you have your in the cloud hosted Office 365 solution, well, then those mailboxes that are still in-house, you're still responsible for those. So what Office 365 is doing, you're protected there, but whatever you're doing in-house may not be. What sort of storage architecture is best to set up to DAG, using SAN, NAS, or direct attached storage? Last I checked, NAS was not supported by Exchange. Yeah, you can, as far as the DAGs, to be honest with you, Microsoft has long promoted with Exchange 2010, and 2007, there's been a focus on using JBOD arrays. So JBOD stands for just a bunch of disks. The nice thing about some of the changes that have been made with Exchange 2010, there are some frustrations. They've eliminated single instance storage, so of course your data can kind of balloon a bit. they recommend a lot of ways to mitigate that, and you should follow best practices from the Microsoft Exchange team in order to accomplish, keeping your database sizes in check. But it has increased performance tremendously. The value of that of performance increase is that now you can utilize just standard, direct attached storage or, JBOD arrays that provide you the performance you need at a less cost. Because, I mean, look, anybody who's bought a SAN knows how expensive that can be. And so for some of you out there who are listening, you're looking at expensive solutions, and maybe you're a small business and you're looking to just set up 2 Exchange servers that can handle your DAG situation and provide at least the disk and server resiliency, if not site resiliency. And in that case, you don't want to have to go spending thousands of dollars on a SAN. So in that solution, again, I would recommend going with a JBOD situation. The other thing about this in terms of cost, some have asked about virtualization. Can you virtualize all of this? You absolutely can. You can virtualize all of this. Here's the problem with virtualization for those who aren't thinking, and they get very excited and they say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to set up 2 servers, Hyper-V on both. I'm going to set up Exchange on both with mailbox servers, and we're going to have multiple roles installed on each one. I'll have my file share witness be a 3rd server that's the domain controller. So okay, I've got this set up, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to virtualize all of this. So I'm going to use 1 server with 3 virtual machines and put them all together. Okay, and that's great. You're still safe in terms of perhaps database. If you have databases on separate disks, you're still possibly safe from database corruption with the DAG. But you know what you've done? You've just eliminated your ability to have server redundancy because everything is still on 1 server. You'd be amazed at how often this happens. Everything is on a single virtual server. Well, that's great. You've saved space in your office with the 1 server, but you've eliminated the value of a DAG because now you have multiple systems running on 1 single server. So what's the point? So just keep that in mind. You can utilize virtualization with DAGs. It works, but make sure that you have your 2 separate servers on 2 separate literal Hyper-V servers. Okay, let's see. With 2 Exchange servers and 2 databases, can one copy be active at one site and another on the other site after all this? Yes, actually, that's a great thought. So this is a design question about the number of Exchange servers and databases and so on. You can have 2 Exchange servers and you can have 2 databases, one on one site, one on the other. Keep in mind, though, that now you're protected because if let's say you have 1,000 users and 500 are set up for the database on the first server, 500 are set up for the database on the second server. They're both handling their workload. If server 1 goes down, then the passive copy on server 2 would kick right into high gear, and you would have the ability to now serve all 1,000 of your users. Nobody would miss a beat, and everyone would be able to continue to work until you got server 1 back up and running. Yes, that's exactly a perfect example of eliminating disaster in disaster recovery. Okay. Business continuity test, that's a bigger question than being able to answer right now. We can, Scott Follick asked about business continuity. By all means, email me that offline and we'll talk about it. If you do DAG, is there information on the CAS requirements for CAS high availability? If the mailbox server switches over, okay. So you're talking about a CAS array. Those are great questions actually, because we've simply been talking about high availability of the mailbox server role through DAG. That is why, even though this is a discussion of high availability, to a degree, we're mainly focusing on disaster and disaster recovery, which typically always focuses on the mailbox. So we've focused on DAG. But if you're talking more about high availability itself, then you have to consider not just your other server roles, the 2 main ones being your CAS and your hub transport servers, which yes, you would need to have a CAS array, and you would need to have for the hub transport servers, you'd need to have at least more than 1. When it comes to a CAS array, can a CAS array be part of a DAG, be on the same server as a DAG? The answer is no if you're going to utilize Microsoft's network load balancing. NLB cannot work with CAS array, cannot work with CAS servers if you also now have that mailbox server as part of a DAG. Reason for that is very simple. NLB is a form of clustering, and DAG is a form of clustering. Clustering services are still installed behind the scenes, so you can't have that server be a member of a of a clustered situation, and then also use NLB. So what do? You use a hardware load balancer if your CAS is on the same server. You know, Microsoft is recommending that you do deploy multiple server roles together. So you could very easily have a mailbox server that has CAS and hub transport on the same server, and it's part of a DAG. What do? You get a load balancer. You get a hardware load balancer. And you know what? I'm just going to throw this out there in case you're wondering, like, hey, where do I get one of these things? There's a couple of them out there. I'm a huge fan of Kemp Technologies. I think they make some of the best load balancers out there in the business, really growing. So there's at least a starting point if you're not sure where to go. Then again, you might have your own, options already in play. Let's see. Let's see what else we have here. We're almost toward the end here. I'm going to turn things back over to Kevin in a minute. I just want to answer one more question. Jonas, good question. Any new features in Exchange 15 on this subject? Jonas, I'm a member of the TAP program, which means that I could answer that question, but if I did, I think that somebody would be knocking on my door in the next 5 seconds, and I'd be dragged away, and you'd never hear from me again. No, I don't. I hope not. I hope it's not that strict. But no, there are stipulations as far as how much I can say about Exchange 15. Let me just say this: from what I've seen, it's not. I can't say anything. Never mind. I just can't say anything. I'll just say that DAGs are awesome, and you don't have to worry so much about Exchange 15 just yet. Let's see. Is DAC mode enabled by default in SP2? It's not. You have to make sure it's enabled. Which of your train signal trainings for Exchange expand on designing a high availability? Let me just get that high availability setup. Actually, I have a high availability course, Exchange 2010 High Availability, that we just finished and it just went live. So you're welcome to check that out. Oh boy, there's so many other questions. Oh, quick question. What if my file witness server fails? If that fails and your other 2 servers are still up and running and still able to talk to each other, then it's no big deal. So you didn't lose quorum because the file witness server is just part of the mix there. If it's one of the servers that fail with the other 2, then you've lost quorum. In fact, you might have lost the whole thing. So again, that's where manual intervention is involved. So DAG and CAS array cannot be on the same server by Sanjay. No, that's not true. The CAS array can be. It just has to be, you have to use a hardware load balancer. You can't use Microsoft's network load balancing. Okay, whew. Well, that's all we had time for today, folks. Any additional questions, by all means, you can email me. We can work that out through email. And I'd be more than happy to finish up answering any other questions that you have. At this time, I'm going to turn things back over to Kevin. I hope you enjoyed the session today. I hope it was a lot of fun. I hope it was interesting. And I hope it gave you something to think about in terms of the features that you have at your disposal. All right, Kevin, take it away.
All right, thank you, Peter. That was a great presentation. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks again for attending and for your participation. As a reminder, today's webinar was recorded and will be available to view at trainsignal.com/blog/webinars. We will also email you the link. And remember, as you leave, please fill out the survey for a chance to win a copy of TrainSignal's Exchange Server 2010 High Availability Training. We will email the winner by the end of the week. Thanks again, and have a great day.